ובין ביבשה.
I knew the amount of hostages that were supposed to be released, and I didn't know their names because of the sensitive of this operation. Very few people in the army knew the names and the identity of the hostages that were supposed to be released. Thanks to the excellent ground troops that we have inside Gaza Strip, our landing and our loading of the 3 hostages lasted less than 1 minute. When I first saw the 3 hostages, Shlomi, Almog, and Andre, walking in the helicopter, I felt relief and happiness that surrounded the whole team, the whole helicopter team that were in this mission. As we were landing in Gaza coast, I looked back and I saw the 3 hostages coming in the helicopter. I looked at Shlomi, and as soon as we took off, I looked him in the eyes and I gave him thumbs up, wanted to signal him that it's all right, he's coming home. And well, I remember this feeling since the operation. I can't stop thinking about it. During the flight to the hospital, I looked back and I saw Shlomi looking out of the window. So I asked the crew chief that was beside him if Shlomi wants to get in the cockpit and talk with us. So we let him in. We gave him an earphones, and we had a 10 minutes conversation with an hostage that just released from captivity. We didn't talk about the captivity. We talked about what we see. I explained him about the helicopter. I told him it's a pretty simple helicopter, and we shared a pretty special moment, the entire team and Shlomi in this flight. Yeah, Almog and Andre were extremely happy. They were sitting here looking out of the window and seeing Israel from the air after 8 months of being held in Hamas captivity, and they were extremely happy and joyful.
I want to remind you again, this is a clip from the Entebbe movie, Mifsa Yonatan, reminding us about Entebbe. In this clip, the star of the movie who plays Yoni Netanyahu, the only one who was killed during the Entebbe operation and rescue, is Yoram Gaon, one of the most famous actors and singers in Israel. And he's also associated with the theme song of the movie. So he was both the star of the movie playing Yoni, and he was the singer of the theme song, which I taught you last week and once before. The theme song, the basic refrain or chorus of the theme song is that this is a country that does not abandon her sons to foreigners. And here we go. This is his speech. This is his speech to the members of the crew, members of the team, who are now going to go up the helicopter and fly to Entebbe, Africa, to Uganda, Africa. And it's sort of his Zionism speech. And he says, I know that you don't like to hear speeches about Zionism. However, a few words. We are now about to go on a flight that's going to take us thousands of kilometers from where we are in Israel. Try to go back. I was trying to. Let me just try to see if I can go back. Okay, good. No, you don't like to hear Zionism. Even so, a few words.
אנחנו יוצאים למבצע במרחק של אלפי קילומטרים מהארץ
כדי להציל ישראלים.
וזאת רק בגלל שהם ישראלים ויהודים. ואם אנחנו לא נעשה את זה, אף אחד אחר לא יעשה את זה בשבילנו. זה מבצע ארוך ומסובך, ואני רוצה להדגיש שהצלחת המבצע או כישלונו תלויים רק בנו. אני מאמין שנצליח.
I believe we're going to succeed.
We're
going to bring these people home. Hatzlacha. Be successful. Now I'm going to play you. This is the same man, like 30 years later. Or so, he never lost his voice. His voice is the same, and he's playing with the Israeli, and this is with the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. And the reason I'm putting this up, partly because of that rescue of the 4 hostages, and although I showed you other versions that had titles, this does not have English titles, but it is so passionate. You'll see what I mean. It's so passionate. Middle of the night, I got up. And they flew across the world. The purpose of bringing these people home. Land of Israel. The Carmel to the desert. They are a people who will not remain silent. Not abandon our sons and fathers.
מחצי הלילה עוברת בשדותינו רוח שרה ערבה אילמת תרכינו אז ראש על אשר עם שחר לא שם אל ארצי אל דבש שדותיה אל הכרמל והמדבר אל עומר אשר שאת בניו לא מפקיר לזרת שדמעותיה נושרות על שדה חמניות צבונה וששונה הם שתי בערב בבגד לא אומה
When I was last here a couple of years.
Okay, let me explain this. Munk, M-U-N-K. Canada has something called the Munk Debates. Again, M-U-N-K, I guess it's a family that founded this organization that puts on debates so that the public, it's like TED Talks, only debates, so that the public in Toronto can be exposed to different ideas, both sides. And there's normally, it's a debate where there's like a proposed resolution, and one side is in favor of the resolution, and one side is against the resolution. And they fly in from around the world, two renowned experts on one side and two renowned experts on the other side. And it's all kinds of subjects. And recently they had a Munk debate, again, M-U-N-K, they had a Munk debate on the resolution, the proposition resolved. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And they've got an audience, and on one side, taking the position that you could be anti-Zionist and that's not anti-Semitic, is a guy named Mehdi Hassan. He's an Arab anti-Semite who's been involved with Al Jazeera. He was also with CNN. And the other one is like one of the biggest anti-Semites in the world, Gideon Levy, or Gidon Levy. He's an Israeli who has a column. Israel has 4 daily newspapers, Israel Today or Yisrael Hayom. That's something like somewhere between the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post. Moderately conservative. Then there's Ma'ariv, which means afternoon or PM. It's the name of a newspaper that used to come out in the end of the day. And that tends to be left of center, like the Washington Post. And then they have Yediot Achronot, which means last thoughts or last ideas of the day. And that's like the New York Daily News. And the one that they like to feel as like their New York Times, their highbrow intellectual paper, is Haaretz, which means the land or the country. And that's way, way, way to the left. To the left of MSNBC, to the left of Salon and Vox and all of that, and Politico. It's way to the left. And Gidon Levy is their star columnist. He shows up once a week, and he says incredibly offensive things about Israel. And as you know, for those of you who are Americans, we have in America our share of people who hate America. So why don't they leave? Because it's too good here. So they stay and they benefit and they hate America. Like Bernie Sanders, capitalism is bad. Socialism is fantastic. The Soviet Union, the breadlines are a good thing. Go on YouTube. Breadlines are a good thing. But meantime, he has 3 houses. It's good here as socialism goes. So Gidon Levy is the anti-Semite par excellence. And he, together with Mehdi Hassan, they're taking the position, and we don't have time for it today, they're taking the position that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. And on the other side, they have Douglas Murray, whom we have seen before, and someone new who I'm going to introduce you to, Natasha Hausman, an international law expert, worked for Skadden Arps, one of the main world law firms. She's based in England. So they both have British accents. So I may have to put up captions if you want to understand them in English, but let's see what happens.
Years ago, I just returned from the front line of the war in Ukraine, where I was with the Ukrainian armed forces. And for most of the last 8 months, I've been in Israel and Gaza, following the war there as closely as I can. And I won't go into all of the details now that I could give you of what's happening. But I would just put it in perspective in this way, first of all. What happened on the 7th of October was not just a massive attack on innocent people inside Israel. It was the equivalent to about 6,000 Canadians being massacred and burned in their homes in one day. It was the equivalent of about 1,500 of your fellow Canadians being taken hostage. You would have thought after an attack like the one that Hamas instigated, that started this terrible war, you would have thought that there would be some sympathy for the world, from the world. You might have thought the world would pay attention to the attack and at least pay attention to the people behind it. You might have expected, like me, that there might have been a worldwide opposition to the terrorists and rapists and murderers of Hamas. You might have thought there would be hatred around the world erupting at the government of Qatar and its mouthpiece, Al Jazeera, its funding of Hamas and its hosting of the leadership of Hamas in Qatar. You might have thought there'd have been an outpouring of rage at the Islamic Revolutionary Government in Tehran, but no. There was an immediate outpouring of rage against the state that had been attacked. Bring back our girls, we had 10 years ago in the war in northern Nigeria, which I also covered. Bring back our girls. No international campaign saying bring back our Jewish children. Believe all women, we've been told for years. But turns out, not if the raped women are Jews. Israel is the only country in the world which, when it's attacked, gets attacked more. You know, the interesting thing about anti-Semitism is, as my late friend Jonathan Sachs said, it's a shape-shifting virus. It moves across the centuries. When you could hate people for their religion, the Jews were hated for their religion. Then you couldn't hate people for that anymore, so people hated the Jews for their race. And then, after the 20th century, people realized that wasn't such a great idea either. Now, the Jews are hated not for their religion or their race, but for having a state. People around the world hate them so much for it that Israelis are attacked when they have hostages taken, and this is to remember the 100 hostages still in captivity in Gaza, who, if they were given back by Hamas today, the war would be over. And they're also attacked when they rescue their hostages. You know, the interesting thing about anti-Semitism is the Jews can never win, because historically they've been hated for being rich and for being poor. They've been hated for integrating and for not integrating. They were hated for being stateless. Remember, rootless cosmopolitans, the far right used to say. And now they're hated for having a state. Today, the only really acceptable form of anti-Semitism, aside from the sewers of the far right, the only real tolerated form of anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism. And Zionism, as we just heard, is simply the right of the Jews to self-determination in their historic homeland. That's all. Anti-Semitism, as we've also just heard, is double standards against Jewish people, or cruel and unfair treatment of people because they're Jews. This isn't very far away from home here. If this isn't anti-Semitism, can the audience here tell me why the following things have happened since October the 7th? Why in a Montreal suburb a synagogue should be firebombed, as happened in November? Why there should have been gunshots against the yeshiva? Why in Toronto a bookstore owned by a Jew should be attacked? Why a Molotov cocktail was thrown through a Jewish community center in Montreal? Why a Toronto Jewish deli in North York was firebombed? Why in Toronto the Orthodox synagogue was vandalized? Why in Toronto 2 men opened fire the other week on a Jewish girls' school? If it isn't anti-Semitism, tell me why just a week ago pro-Hamas protesters tried to go through Jewish areas in this city shouting not just Allahu Akbar, but, and I quote, sorry for the language, fucking filthy fucking Zionist pigs, dirty Zionist rats. Have you heard that language before? The Jews have. Now look, if you are interested in this motion, just bear this in mind. It's not about Netanyahu, it's not about this war, it's about double standards, and one question hovers over it above all. The question of who would protect the Jews. Who would you trust to protect them? The Europeans? The Arab world? No. History shows only one people will protect the Jewish people. The Jewish people. That's what Zionism is. Thank you. And finally, I just want to say this. It's perfectly obvious, I said at the beginning, that you can get anti-Semitism from all directions. This just happens to be the major direction.
These are his closing remarks. That was his opening remarks. This is his closing remarks.
Which is coming in at the moment, in the guise of anti-Zionism. As I said, does everybody who is doing this know what they're doing? No. Almost certainly not. Do some of them? Oh, you bet. They're having a whale of a time. People like those people I mentioned marching last week through Jewish areas of Toronto, getting to scream about the pigs and the rats again. Wow, it feels good to them. Does everyone know what they're doing? No. But when you hear Gideon saying that, what did you say earlier? that Israel is the most brutal regime in the world. You can have traveled nowhere, sir. And there is no reason, as I said at the beginning of this tonight, why simply recognizing that the anti-Zionism of today is anti-Semitism should be any barrier to there being some kind of peace settlement at some point. But please understand that those of us who recognize that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is because we see, after a mass slaughter of Jews, the world turning on the one Jewish state. That is what we see and what we worry about, and what some people like maybe seem not to care about, and all of the smears and all of the lies that they get to pump out. But I've got good news for you, ladies and gentlemen, to finish. I hope very much that you vote the right way tonight, obviously. And it matters for Canada and its image. But the Jewish state and the Jewish people have survived an awful lot worse than this. They have seen off every single one of their enemies, from Pharaoh to the Abyssinians, to the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans. They will see off Hamas, they will see off Mahdi, and they will outlive everybody in this room.
How will military assets help get aid to Gaza by sea? Aid deliveries will...
As you know, there's this myth about starvation in Gaza. It's a myth. People are starving in Africa. People are starving in India. People are starving in the United States in Appalachia. I don't just mean starving, I'm talking famine. I lived in Louisville, Kentucky for a year when I was clerking for Judge Boggs after law school. And Louisville, Kentucky is to the west, well, a little bit of the west, northwestern Kentucky, and Appalachia is on the east. That's coal mining country, and people are hungry there. I went there. I spent several days there. Harlan County. That's where the McCoys lived during the Hatfield and McCoys period. Those are people are starving. You know, for months now, we've been hearing that any day now the famine will begin in Gaza. You can be sure that the news media, ABC, NBC, CBS, AP, BBC, Israel's Con 11 and 12 and 13, you could be sure you would be seeing on the nightly news all those starving dead bodies, and that the New York Times and Washington Post would be front-paging photographs of all those thousands and thousands of dead bodies, just as they show photographs of bombed out buildings. For months, they've been talking about famine. We're waiting for it. Not that we want people to be dying of famine when I say we're waiting for it. We're waiting to see what is that all about? There's no famine. There's no famine. There's more food in Gaza. Food prices have gone down, supply and demand. There's more food than people actually need. The problem is that Hamas interferes with the distribution system and takes the food, and then they sell the food. So Biden just spent $230 million of American taxpayer money to put up a pier on the argument that we can't get the food in through Israel because the Israelis are barbarians. Nobody talks about whether Egypt is allowing food in on the other side, because that's also a border. So Biden set up a $230 million pier in the Mediterranean. That's the background for this next segment. Our peerless president
will be shipped on civilian vessels from the port of Larnaca in Cyprus, which will become a main relief hub. These will deliver the aid to a floating offshore pontoon placed well clear of the Gaza coast and the conflict zone for transfer to joint or Navy support vessels known as logistic support vessels or LSVs. These will take the aid to a 500-metre floating pier under construction by US military engineers and called the Joint Logistics Over the Shore, or JLOT system. It's been described as a huge Lego-like system with interlocking 40-foot-long pieces of steel that form a pier and causeway of up to 1,800 feet. This will allow aid to be offloaded onto trucks and taken into Gaza for distribution. A UK naval support vessel, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary ship Cardigan Bay, is supporting the US military as it builds the temporary pier, providing accommodation for hundreds of US sailors and soldiers. Stuart Rumble, Forces News. Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like.
A floating pier built by U.S. troops will soon allow humanitarian aid deliveries into Gaza. According to U.S. Central Command, troops anchored the floating pier to a beach in Gaza. Yesterday, the deputy commander stressed the pier was not intended to replace land routes into Gaza, and there would be no U.S. military boots on the ground in Gaza. Trucks are expected to begin moving the humanitarian aid ashore in the coming days.
Meantime, the major development tonight from Gaza, the U.S. military building that floating pier. It is now ready to get in 500 tons of desperately needed food and humanitarian supplies to the people of Gaza. ABC's Matt Gupman with late reporting from Israel now.
New images tonight of that U.S.-built floating pier now anchored to the beach in Gaza, just south of some of the heaviest fighting. About twice as long as an aircraft carrier, the pier will allow desperately needed aid to be brought by ship directly into Gaza. About 1,000 U.S. military personnel involved, but it'll be up to the UN to coordinate distribution, and U.S. officials stress there will be no boots on the ground. The first delivery of 500 tons of aid expected within days.
You should really think of this as a crawl, walk, run. It's going to start off small and scale up.
It comes at a critical moment, with fighting in Rafah choking off aid by land and daily blockades from small groups of Israelis. Today, we witnessed these men stopping trucks.
So what they're trying to do is block trucks like this, you can see this kid running, and demand the ID of the drivers. That's how they know whether they're delivering aid or not. Easy.
The soldier offering the agitators information about the aid convoys, then coming out and threatening us not to film it. It comes as Israel increasingly seems bogged down in Gaza. 5 were killed in a friendly fire incident in northern Gaza, where the IDF says Hamas has regrouped.
David, back to that pier. Israel has guaranteed security on shore, but U.S. officials tell us there will be American troops at the far end of the pier in order to receive that aid, but that's the closest they'll get to land. And those officials say they're not aware of any direct threat to those troops, but they do acknowledge, David, that this is not without risk.
Matt Gupman in Tel Aviv for us again tonight. Thank you, Matt.
As the Israeli ground offensive pushes ahead in the Gaza Strip, the United States has announced its floating jetty off the Mediterranean coast is complete, promising 500,000 tons of aid in a matter of days, shipped in via Cyprus.
The temporary pier is now in place and affixed, and we expect assistance to flow through this route in the coming days. The temporary pier, part of the humanitarian maritime corridor, is additive to the other routes and will assist humanitarian organizations providing life-saving assistance.
No aid has entered the enclave through the Rafah crossing since the Israeli ground operation entered a new phase last week. And as NGOs report a worsening fuel shortage in the enclave, hindering their operations, many fear it may not be possible to distribute the supplies delivered by sea. The UN welcomed the completion of the pier with a note of caution.
Getting aid to people in need into and across Gaza cannot and should not depend on a floating dock far from where needs are most acute. Land routes are the most viable, effective, and efficient aid delivery method, and for that, we need access by land now.
And, delivered by the US military, many Gazans view the pier and its grand promises as a political smokescreen.
I strongly object to these American ships. They hit us at night and then support us during the day. We have a number of border crossings that aid can come through, supplies and food aid.
The latest phase of Israel's ground offensive has displaced 700,000 people in just over a week from both Rafah and areas of the north, an operation the Israeli government has vowed to intensify.
Is pausing a major route bringing aid to people in Gaza and hopes to repair a floating pier carrying the essentials.
This is like a week after they set up this pier. it started floating off into the Mediterranean. Well,
Pentagon says the $320 million pier was damaged yesterday and over the weekend. Fixes could take more than a week, and then the structure will still need to be re-anchored. For now, officials say airdrops are still possible, but land crossings are bottlenecked.
It was never intended to supplant what you can do on the ground through trucks and getting those crossings open.
U.S. aid says thousands of tons of supplies are now waiting on the island of Cyprus.
Another setback tonight for that $230 million floating pier built by the U.S. military.
This is after they re-anchored it. They had to take it out again.
To deliver much-needed aid to the Gaza Strip. Rough seas forced the military to temporarily dismantle the pier and tow it to a port in Israel to ride out the bad weather. More than 7.5 million pounds of aid have been delivered through the pier in the past month.
Do what we need to do to make that happen. Thank you, Laura. And then I'll go to this side of the room, I promise.
Thank you. So the New York Times just reported, based on aid groups, saying that the pier could be dismantled as early as this coming month in July. Is that accurate?
Look, we've said all along, first of all, that the pier is a temporary measure. I don't have any dates to announce in terms of when it will cease operations. Of course, as I just mentioned, we're looking forward to getting it operational again soon. And to delivering aid, and we're going to capitalize on the conditions, in terms of weather, to get as much aid across that pier as we can.
Is there a delay in getting the pier back operational now, or is it not repaired?
Well, as you know, it went to Ashdod to get repaired, and I just said again, it's going to get. We expect that it will go operational again this week.
Okay. And then I just wanted to ask.
They're claiming there's a famine in Gaza, but what if I could show you that this is a lie?
In Gaza, we are no longer on the brink of famine. We are in a state of famine.
This is the highest number of people facing catastrophic hunger ever recorded by the Integrated Food Security Classification System.
Some prominent politicians have gone as far as accusing Israel of deliberately creating a famine.
A famine that is being intentionally precipitated through the blocking of food and global humanitarian assistance by leaders in the Israeli government.
I'm now going to show how none of this is true. The IPC identifies the severity of food crises and determines when a crisis escalates to a famine. And this is how the UN defines famine.
Famine is a technical term. We say there is a famine when three conditions come together. First, at least 20% of the population in that particular place must be facing extreme levels of hunger. Second, 30% of the children in the same place must be wasted. And the third condition is that the mortality rate must double from the average of, for adults, 1 person per 10,000 per day to 2 people per 10,000 per day. When these three conditions come together, we say it's a famine.
So now you know what they consider a famine. You'll be surprised to hear that way back in November, the IPC had already declared there was a famine in Gaza. They claimed it was affecting 377,000 people. Then in February, they upgraded this to 677,000, and then again to 1.1 million in March. So if there were 2 deaths for every 10,000 of these people, there should have been over 30,000 adults dying from malnutrition. But this never happened. Contrary to the IPC's claim, Israel has actually facilitated the transfer of over 500,000 tons of aid into Gaza. Just look at these markets, they're filled with food. In fact, There's so much aid reaching Gaza that when America airdropped food into the Strip, many locals filmed themselves destroying it to show that they didn't want nor need American help. If there was a famine, would this be happening? But don't take my word for all of this. The IPC's Famine Review Committee just released a report explicitly stating that it was not plausible that northern Gaza had ended a famine in April. So when the UN and EU claimed otherwise, they were lying. The entire narrative was a fabrication. The IPC, which had claimed a famine as early as November, was now forced to admit there was no famine. In fact, their review committee went as far as saying that the previous analysis had undercounted the amount of aid in Gaza, explaining that private sector food trucks had been excluded. If these had been included, they would estimate that up to 157% of northern Gaza's caloric needs would have been met in April. Out of desperation to vilify Israel or to force a ceasefire, the lie of famine had spread like wildfire.
A significant proportion of Gaza's population is facing famine, full-blown famine in northern Gaza.
This lie has been spread to damage Israel's reputation, but it's a lie that's costing tax-paying Americans. Since October the 7th, America has wasted hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars on unnecessary aid. For example, America built a floating pier to facilitate the flow of aid into Gaza, but it wasn't needed as there wasn't an issue of getting aid in. There were some internal distribution problems caused by the ongoing conflict, damaged roads and theft, but building a pier didn't solve any of these. And to make matters worse, the pier broke, so Americans paid $230 million for a pier that wasn't needed, didn't help, and didn't even work. Israel should be applauded for the incredible and continued efforts it's made to prevent a famine in Gaza, but instead, the IPC was weaponized and used to unjustly attack the world's only Jewish state.
The Hezbollah terror organization in Lebanon has been escalating its attacks against Israel. Since deciding to join the war that Hamas started on October 7th, Hezbollah has fired over 5,000 rockets, anti-tank missiles, and explosive UAVs from Lebanon at Israeli families, homes, and communities. Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation, one that could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region. Hezbollah is jeopardizing the future of Lebanon so that it can be a shield for Hamas, a shield for the Hamas terrorists, the one that murdered the elderly, raped women, burned children, and kidnapped Jews, Muslims, and Christians during their massacre on October 7th. When we say that we will not let October 7th happen again on any one of our borders, we mean it. Because of Hezbollah's refusal to comply with UN Security Council Resolution 1701, because of Hezbollah's military infrastructure, weapons, and fire at Israel from the area south of the Litani River in southern Lebanon, and because of Lebanon's failure to enforce 1701 on Hezbollah, Israel will take the necessary measures to protect its civilians until security along our border with Lebanon is restored. One way or another, we will ensure the safe and secure return of Israelis to their homes in northern Israel. This is not up for negotiation. Iran's terror proxies continue to drag the region to destruction. Israel will continue fighting against Iran's axis of evil on all fronts, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in other fronts, as we work towards a more secure future for the entire Middle East. October 7th cannot, will not happen again on any one of Israel's border. Israel has a duty to defend the people of Israel. We will fulfill that duty at all costs.
When Secretary Blinken was recently here in Israel, we had a candid conversation. I said I deeply appreciated the support the U.S. has given Israel from the beginning of the war. But I also said something else. I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel. Israel, America's closest ally, fighting for its life, fighting against Iran and our other common enemies. Secretary Blinken assured me that the administration is working day and night to remove these bottlenecks. I certainly hope that's the case. It should be the case. During World War II, Churchill told the United States, "Give us the tools, we'll do the job." And I say, give us the tools and we'll finish the job a lot faster.
Ik heb een tijdje, lang geleden, in Israël gewoond.
As you know, this is the
Ik heb
new
ook
leader
gezien
in Holland.
vanuit, toen was het nog vanuit Jordanië, waar de terroristen binnenkwamen. Ik heb ook zelf meegemaakt hoe het was als die terroristen de grens overkwamen en hoe je moest schuilen in schuilkelders en hoe dan het leger met helikopters en magnesiumbommen verlichting keek waar de mensen waren om hun bevolking te beschermen. En ik weet één ding, dat de haat vanuit dit soort islamitische groeperingen als Hamas, maar er is ook islamitische jihad, er is Hezbollah, er zijn heel veel van die groepen, die en niemand anders ontkennen het bestaansrecht van de Joodse staat. Volgens mij bent u heeft ook zo'n plaatje ooit gemaakt, volgens mij of uw collega, over hoe Israël eruit zou zien. Nou, dat u ontkende ook in dat plaatje het bestaan van Israël. En ik vind dat is dus niet alleen antisemitisch, maar dat is dus precies hoe het niet moet. Ze worden aangevallen door mensen die ervoor zorgen en die willen dat een land en een volk niet bestaat. Dat is niet wat Israël doet. In Israël zitten Arabieren in de Knesset, in het parlement. In Israël zijn het volwaardige burgers die daar beter af zijn als ze in Israël wonen dan in de Palestijnse gebieden wonen. Israël valt niet en heeft nooit een ander land aangevallen zonder eerst aangevallen te zijn. Is nooit gebeurd. Niet in de Yom Kippur-oorlog, in geen enkele oorlog. Maar nu hebben we een groep die representeert radicale moslims, niet alle moslims, maar radicale moslims. En die zijn erop uit om de Joodse staat te vernietigen en hun inwoners te vermoorden. En voor mij en mijn fractie is het dan niet moeilijk om te kijken met wie wij solidariteit hebben. Hebben we dat met het Joodse volk die vecht voor zijn bestaan? Of hebben we dat voor het islamitisch, extremistisch, terroristisch tuig die ze wil uitroeien? En ik zeg u, tot de laatste snik die ik heb, steun ik de staat Israël.
Joining us now, O'Leary Ventures Chairman Kevin O'Leary. It's always great to have you with us, Kevin, to get your perspective on what's going on in the world. And when it comes to what we've seen on campuses, we're talking a lot about the president, specifically the president of Columbia University. I'm wondering if this is a kind of situation, we look at it like a business or a company. If you're the CEO of a company, the buck stops with you. But at universities, these presidents aren't really taking as much responsibility. In a way, it seems to be that the culture is permeated almost from the bottom up, if you will, rather than the top down. And it's just like a little more complicated. I'm wondering how you look at this and how we could start to, as a country and communities specifically, start to rehab some of the damage that's been done here.
Well, I think that's a really interesting analogy you brought forward, running them like a business. And in a way, a university is a business because it looks for income from student fees, from the government certainly, and of course from donors, its faculty and students. As they become successful, they come back and give to the endowment. But what universities never saw coming, and I'm quite intrigued with this because I'll be teaching this topic at Harvard this fall, is social media. The management of universities almost everywhere have been decimated by the power of social media. It's out of their control. And so the minute something happens that's controversial, it gets amplified 1,000,000x on social, including the student base and students in every other university. And this is a new phenomenon that was not around in the protests that occurred around the Vietnam War, for example, in the 60s, or the war in Afghanistan. Social media back then didn't exist, and certainly the news footage was selected and curated by the networks that then put it on TV at night. And there was only 3 of them at that time. Today, everybody is their own network. It's all 4K resolution, and the message gets out in seconds, totally beyond the control of a university board or president or dean or anybody else. And they've all got to learn how to deal with this.
Yeah. Kevin, the CEO of the Hims and Hers company, they're a personal care company, came out initially and said, I support these protesters and what they're doing. There's a place for you. We'll hire you at our company. He had to kind of dial that back after the company got a lot of pushback and the stock price went down. You're going to be teaching students at Harvard, just found that out. Are you going to be telling them, hey, if you want to do this kind of stuff, be prepared. It's going to follow you the rest of your career and it could hurt you?
You know, let me preface my comments about this situation by saying that I don't support war, and I don't get behind either side. I'm against war, and I support entrepreneurship in America. That's what I focus on. However, if I were a majority shareholder in a control position of equity or debt in that company, I would have fired this individual seconds after he made those remarks. Wow. Be gone. Because who are you serving by saying that? You know you're in a highly polarized situation. 50% of your market does not agree with your view. We know that's the case. People are very polarized by this war, as they are in every war. So who are you serving by saying something like that? You're not serving your employees. You're not serving your customers. You're not serving your shareholders. You're serving yourself. And for that, I call you an idiot and I whack you. You have no right to push your values on everybody else. You can have an opinion just like I can or anybody else can, but it is not your business to polarize everybody on your stack of shareholders and customers and employees. That mistake has already been made. We saw it first happen at Anheuser-Busch. Look what happened there, $6 billion worth market cap. If you can't figure this out as a CEO, your board should fire you right now. And if you were working for me, you'd be whacked in seconds. Seconds, you'd be history.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Biden's talking about another additional student debt bailout. Economists, as you know, we're already talking about how highly
for being here.
Take care.
Jamaal Bowman, who represents much of the Bronx and Westchester County, is under investigation.
Okay, this one's very important. This Tuesday, another 3 days, in another 3 days, New York State has its primaries. Many of the states already have had their primaries. The New York primaries are in 3 days. Jamaal Bowman is a member of the Squad. The Squad, you know, that's Ocasio and Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. And they've emerged not only in general and for woke politics, which is not at all what our program is about, but they've also emerged as anti-Semitic, the whole bunch of them. Jamaal Bowman initially was thought to be different, the one and only member of the Squad who's a man and who is going to be a friend of the Jews because he was running in a heavily liberal Jewish district, including Westchester. And initially, he was not like a big Israel supporter, but he shocked everybody in the Squad by taking a trip to Israel and visiting Israel. He was critical, but he was practically thrown out. In fact, he was thrown out of the Democrat Socialists of America for even going to Israel. So he'd been representing, and little by little, presumably by virtue of spending 2 years in Congress, with Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Ocasio and all these anti-Semites, little by little, he's become an anti-Semite. And the Jewish liberals who elected him, even the liberalism can just go far. There's good liberalism if that's your worldview, and that's fine. And then there's that part that's just too far off, where even a lot of the, like we've been seeing in some of the interviews with people like Michael Douglas and stuff, there's a point where it's too much. So there's a guy who previously had been in Congress in that district and was persuaded to come in and run for the office to get Bowman out. And in a heavily Democrat district, whoever wins the primary is going to win in November, just as in a heavily Republican district. Whoever wins the Republican primary is going to win in November. The people in November, they're just going to vote for whoever is in the party that they always vote for. So if it's a district where it's like really, really heavily Democrat or really, really heavily Republican, you won't get enough crossover in those kind of districts, and it all comes down to the primary. So whoever wins Tuesday's primary between George Latimer, and Bowman is going to be elected in November to be the congressman in that district. And because Bowman is such an anti-Semite, and there's a real chance he will become the first member of the squad ever primaried out of office, I wanted to show you what happened this week with him. But first, it's important to know who this character is. He's the guy that set off a fire alarm in the House of Congress in order to break up a session before a vote. And you'll see where this is going.
Investigation for pulling a fire alarm before the House voted on the funding bill earlier this evening. A camera captured Bowman pulling the alarm. He says it was an accident and told reporters he was trying to get through a door thinking the alarm would open it. He later released a statement reading in part, quote, "Today I was rushing to make a vote. I came to a door that is usually open for votes, but today would not open. I'm embarrassed to admit that I activated the fire alarm, mistakenly thinking it would open the door. I regret this, sincerely apologize for any confusion this caused, but I want to be very clear, this was not me in any way trying to delay any vote."
Now the New York Post gives us a better look at the fire. Here we go.
What's up? What's up? What's up?
And finally, on Bowman, this was from yesterday. He held a campaign rally. Ocasio and Berne Sanders came to give him support. I apologize in advance. I must warn you, we're only going to see 4 minutes of it. I must warn you, there is some strong language.
What's up, New York? What's up? What's up? What's up?
And the only reason I'm presenting it, despite the language, he's the Honorable Jamaal Bowman.
So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your love. Thank you for believing in me personally. But most importantly, thank you for believing in this movement, y'all. Because our movement is more powerful than their money. Our people are more powerful than their power. And it's time for us to show them the real power of the people, y'all. So we gonna roll up our sleeves. And we gonna let the guns out. And we gonna let them know how strong and powerful and mighty we are. Because when we come together as a people, across race, across class, across background, across religion, when we come together as a people, we cannot be stopped, y'all. And we will not be stopped. We are here. Let me tell you why we are here. We are at this moment in American history because of all of the work we all have done throughout our entire lives. We have been organizing for justice. We have been organizing for housing as a human right, for health care as a human right, for criminal justice reform, and to get fucking big money out of politics. And because they see the power of our movement, they are spending more money than has ever been spent in American history, y'all. But they are the money, we are the mighty. They are the money, we are the many. And they will not stop us. No matter what, we will not be stopped. Now, some of you know I was an educator before going to Congress. Shout out to education. And I started my career not too far from here. So before I go any further, I need you to rock with me for a second. South Bronx, 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 ho. That was weak, y'all. We are in the South Bronx. We are in the South Bronx. This is the birthplace of hip-hop. I am the hip-hop congressman. I want to hear South Bronx chant right now. South Bronx, 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 South Bronx. We are going to show fucking AIPAC the power of the motherfucking South Bronx. People ask me why I got a foul mouth. What am I supposed to do? You coming after me. You coming after my family. You coming after my children. I'm not supposed to fight back. I'm not supposed to fight back. We're gonna show them who the fuck we are. We're gonna show them who the fuck we are. Bowman, Bowman.
So that was the Honorable Jamaal Bowman, Congressman. We are going to show blankety blank AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the power of the mother, blah, 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 South Bronx. Be on the look Tuesday night. That's the primary. God willing, George Latimer will beat him, and he can go back to his career in education. Imagine children going to school with a teacher like that.
Natasha Hausdorff, let's have your opening statement now.
I showed you the Munk debate earlier with Douglas Murray, and I said earlier that I'd be introducing you as well to Natasha Hausdorff, who I'd seen 2 or 3 of her speeches. She's not nobody's Douglas Murray, but she's right up there.
Well, thank you and good evening. What a privilege it is to be here, stood on this stage on what I consider to be the most important topic of our age.
This is her opening statement. I then will have her reply and her closing statement.
I have to begin with a debating tip coming from a land with a culture of a rich history of debate. And that is that in debates, it is for the proposition to define the motion. And Douglas did that for you, loud and clear. Mehdi seems to think that he can redefine anti-Zionism without you noticing, but the proposition are not going to allow him to pull the wool over your eyes and conflate Zionism with politics. Who has the right to define Zionism? Well, apart from the proposition in this debate, because that's how the rules work. Would you ask a misogynist to define misogyny? You wouldn't ask a sex offender to define rape. You wouldn't ask the KKK to define anti-black racism. So why, when it comes to the Jews, would you let the anti-Zionists define anti-Zionism? No, ladies and gentlemen, no minority should have its identity dictated to it. And we have defined Zionism. It concerns the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their ancient homeland. Zionism is not a political ideology. Zionism does not stipulate how the Jewish state should be governed, which is what a political ideology does. It simply says it should exist. It doesn't dictate borders or the makeup of population. It does not say that Israel should be socialist kibbutzim or capitalist startup nation. Israel has exemplified both of those and everything in between. This is not about political ideology. This debate is about racism and creating a double standard where you make an exception for the Jews. Now, you don't have to support Zionism, but if you are anti-Zionist, if you are against the Jews having a state, you are against the Jews. Mehdi Hasan is lying about what Zionism is, and in an attempt to win this debate and to provide cover for his own anti-Semitism, we usually hear a series of lies spewed by anti-Semites and anti-Zionists in an attempt to justify their anti-Zionism, and these are the modern blood libel. They are widely believed as the ancient blood libel, that Jews killed Christian children to use their blood for religious ritual, as widely believed and as false. I'm going to take you through 4 blood libels that anti-Zionists rely on. Number 1, the libel of colonialism. Israel is the ultimate decolonization success story. Against all odds, after Arab imperialism, Islamic conquest, and British colonialism, the Jews indigenous to Judea re-established Israel. My family lived under Ottoman and then British colonialism in Jerusalem long before Yasser Arafat, who was born in Cairo, created Palestinian national identity in the 60s. Number 2, the libel of ethnic cleansing. In 1948, when 5 Arab armies and the local Arab population attacked the fledgling state of Israel with the stated intention of annihilating its people, 700,000 Arabs escaped the fighting. Those that remained became Israeli citizens. The Arab population of Israel has increased tenfold. This is ethnic cleansing? No. Ethnic cleansing is what happened to the Jews in 1948 when Jordan occupied the West Bank. Ethnic cleansing is what happened to 850,000 Jews expelled from Yemen, Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, where they'd lived for thousands of years. Ethnic cleansing left Arab countries Jew-free. Meanwhile, 2 million Arabs live in Israel today. Number 3, the libel of apartheid. Because those Arabs that remained in Israel are now 20% of its population, the only free Arabs in the Middle East. They are represented in every area of Israeli society as mayors, army officers, police commanders, members of parliament, and the Supreme Court. I served under Salim Gibran, who put both an Israeli prime minister and a president in jail. And those who propagate the lie of apartheid seek to conflate Arab citizens of Israel with Arabs living under the Palestinian Authority, who have an autonomy and should be voting for their leadership. But President Mahmoud Abbas is now in his 19th year of his 4-year term. Number 4, the libel of genocide, the reprehensible smear that maliciously accuses the Jews of perpetrating the very crimes committed against them. October 7 was the latest in a long history of genocidal acts by Arabs against Jews in the Middle East. The genocide libel inverts reality. Hamas has spent 16 years embedding its terror infrastructure in mosques, schools, hospitals, and every second house. Its central military tactic is to use civilians as human shields. And in the face of these unprecedented challenges, the IDF has taken greater measures to prevent civilian casualties than any other army in history, far exceeding the requirements of international law. Genocide is the latest modern blood libel that anti-Semites use to justify their anti-Zionism, and it is central to Hamas's war strategy. Today, its only aim is to survive, and to achieve this with international pressure on the Jews to cease their self-defense. Voting for the opposition supports Hamas in this endeavor by legitimizing, aiding, and abetting their anti-Zionist aim to wipe out the Jews from the river to the sea. Don't stand with the terrorists and anti-Semites. Stand on the side of moral integrity. Stand with the
opposition.
Thank you, Natasha Hausdorff. Natasha Hausdorff will have your rebuttal now.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to use my time to do some fact-checking, but I only have 3 minutes, so we'll see how far I get. But first of all, Balfour. We heard him quoted to you earlier, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let's be clear about that quote and what was changed, or at least misrepresented. He'd referred to Jews as alien and hostile. In fact, that he was therefore an anti-Semite. Well, I'm going to read you out the quote, and you make up your own minds. He said, mitigate the age-long miseries created for Western civilization by the presence in its midst of a body which it too long regarded as alien and even hostile, but which it was equally unable to expel or absorb. You very strongly not to take for granted what the opposition are telling you tonight. And now we come to look at the numbers, and we've heard 37 and 38,000 quoted at you already this evening, and we've only just started. Ladies and gentlemen, would members of the opposition be quoting figures from Al-Qaeda or ISIS in the way that they are quoting Hamas propaganda here this evening? These figures, which have not been verified, which even the UN has revised down on the basis of missing information for significant thousands of these figures that have come from quote-unquote media sources as opposed to from hospitals, and that have been circulated on Google Docs where people are encouraged to enter their martyrs here. This is the methodology for compiling these supposed figures. But even if we look past that and all of the studies that have already debunked these as significantly fabricated and invented, these figures make no distinction between civilians or combatants. They do not tell you how these people have died. We know that Hamas are shooting their own civilians. We know that they are bombing fleeing civilians. We know that when Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas rockets fall short in the Gaza Strip, they kill indiscriminately, unlike the measures that Israel takes, which are targeted, precise, and based on proportionality exercises. I mentioned that Israel takes more measures than any other army in the history of war to prevent civilian casualties. Hamas's main aim here is to drive up that casualty figure and inflate it, if necessary, in order to seek to win this war through creating international pressure. And it is inextricably linked with what we are discussing here tonight, because their mechanism for doing so is not just the lies about the origins of anti-Semitism or whether Balfour was an anti-Semite, but also significantly about what is happening on the ground. That is anti-Zionism, and it is double standard against the Jewish state, which means that we know that it is anti-Semitism too.
Natasha Hausdorff, 4 minutes on the clock. Your closing statement, please.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've heard a lot about freedom of speech this evening, and I think it's important to clarify that Douglas and I aren't here to silence anyone. We're just here for the proper identification of what we've been hearing from the opposition. And that is anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And let me be clear, I do not blame the whole world for the venomous hatred that Israel is currently being subject to. I blame the opposition and the blood libels that they have peddled in this evening. Gideon began with a statement of his credentials. Perhaps I should do the same. I sit in front of you as the granddaughter of Palestinians. Living under the British, they had identity cards issued to them that identified them as Palestinians, nationals of the British Mandate. Think on that the next time you hear people trying to revise history and tell you what Palestinians are today and suggest that that is equivalent to what existed before the State of Israel was formed. We have heard hostility to the State of Israel from the moment that Gideon got up. The suggestion that a gathering like this would be out of place in the Jewish state is preposterous. I've attended many myself. And you have the most rigorous, robust debate imaginable in Israel. More so, I would suggest, than anywhere in the world. But if the opposition really cared about Palestinians in the way that they profess, they would be calling, as I do, for Egypt to comply with its international law obligations, those that it signed up to in the African Union Convention on Refugees, which it acceded to in 1980, Egypt's responsibility to allow safe passage for refugees fleeing civil disorder in Gaza. Israel has gone above and beyond, and other modern militaries frequently say we wouldn't be able to meet the standards that Israel sets in the precautions that it takes. But it has had to move those civilians, or encourage them to move, it doesn't control them, to evacuate, to provide humanitarian corridors. When you think of the ease with which those civilians could be properly provided for the other side of the border with Egypt, in Egyptian Rafah, where the aid that Israel is facilitating into the Gaza Strip wouldn't be diverted and stolen by Hamas, where aid workers would be able to assist them without being targeted by Hamas. I haven't heard any of that from the opposition today, and that is another reason that I say to you, what they are putting forward, the blood libels that they are peddling in, is anti-Zionism. And we also saw it in that comment from Gideon, give it back, referring to the West Bank. It's the settlers, the settlers. That call for the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, to be Jew-free, as so much of the rest of the Arab world, Judenrein. We've heard that before, ladies and gentlemen. We were told because Jews in the 20th century differed about whether the creation of the State of Israel was a good idea, that was a reason that Jews couldn't be anti-Semitic if they were anti-Zionist. Well, I urge you to consider a debate between parents, which might be entirely legitimate as to whether or not to have a child. There may be arguments for and against, reasonable ones. But once that child is born, to suggest that it should be gotten rid of would be murder. That is what we have heard advocated by the opposition today. And so I ask you, if you are, as Israel, liberal, care about peace, and abhor racism, you will stand with the proposition this evening.
I just wanted to show you, by the way, the result of that debate really quick. The statistics, they actually posted the statistics, and we'll come right back. Let's see if I got it. Yeah. The Munk debate on June 17, people before the debate on the proposition of, let's see. Well, okay, the proposition was anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And before the debate, 61% were agreed anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. 39% took the Gideon Levy and Mehdi Hassan position. And there was a swing of 5%. People who actually came in with one mindset were swung over, those with two tremendous presentations. We're winding down. This happened. Jerry Seinfeld was doing some stand-up in Australia this past week.
A genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East.
Jerry Seinfeld.
Okay. Jerry.
We have a genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East.
Jerry Seinfeld, who created a career, a show about nothing. Jerry Seinfeld, who did stand-up, has done stand-up for over 40 years at this point. You never really knew his political beliefs on anything, right? What's the deal with lampshades, right? Like his whole thing was just about the minutia and the mundane of life. Suddenly, because post-October 7th, he went to Israel once and basically said Jews have a right to defend themselves. He seems to be public enemy number one for all these pro-Hamas people. Here he is in Australia destroying a pro-Hamas heckler at one of his stand-up routines. This is, I think, yesterday.
Yes. We have a genius, ladies and gentlemen. He solved the Middle East. He solved it. It's the Jewish comedians. That's what we have to get. They're the ones doing everything. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. They're going to start punching you in about 3 seconds, so I would try and get all of your genius out so we can all learn from you. It's a comedy show, you moron. Get out of here. Yeah, this is so important. Imagine, by the way, imagine if this guy actually did solve the Yes, so you're really influencing everyone here. We're all on your side now because you have made your point so well and in the right venue. You come to the right place for a political conversation. Tomorrow we will read in the paper, Middle East 100% solved thanks to man at the Kudos Arena stopping Jew comedian. They stopped him and everyone in the Middle East went, oh my God, let's just get along. We can't do that. Because I know there are problems here with indigenous Aboriginal people and the white. They have problems here, so maybe to solve that, I will screw up Jim Jeffries in a show in New York. If this works, that will work. You have to go 20,000 miles from the problem and screw up a comedian. That is how you solve world issues.
It's a comedy show, you moron. The reason I'm showing you that, first off, there's thousands of people, obviously, that paid for tickets, that want to hear Jerry, that want to laugh. I've seen him do stand-up live a couple of times. I did a couple shows with him years ago. He's incredible live, absolutely incredible live. He doesn't go off script that much, so that was a nice little moment. But what it really gets down to is these people. You have a student at Chicago University or University of Illinois talking about upending capitalism, ending America, blah, blah, blah. And then what they're also doing when they're out in the streets or they're going to public events and they're trying to ruin everything. Everywhere you go, you will go to a public park and you will see a sign for jihad. You will go to a stand-up show and some idiot will vent their feelings about genocide. Why are you going to a Jerry Seinfeld stand-up concert and doing that? But they think they own everything. And once we don't protect any of the goodness of the West, everything will be destroyed. Hey, don't click away just yet, because today...
Notice how every single little sentence that they put up, there's some adjective, verb, or adverb that everything else is accurate, but like they throw in the word rampage, like you're at war. Misery. Ambush. Near humanitarian area, as opposed to near Hamas post. That seems okay. Except they're calling Hamas militants rather than terrorists. Leads. Furious, bloody. Obviously, they're going after Hamas terrorists who position themselves in these areas. All they have to do is give back the hostages and surrender. We've already heard about those numbers. Even the anti-Semitic United Nations has downgraded the numbers. And here they killed a major guy. This guy. He was part of the he was a commander on October 7.
On what's going on in the Middle East.
And this is basically just about the last thing for the day, other than the prayer for the armed forces. During an operation this week, a father in the army, a guy in the army, he encountered another unit where his son is serving. And this is the father and son, two of them soldiers, meeting in a building in Rafiah. And they enjoyed a moment, an emotional moment together. Last Sunday was Father's Day.
Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Uyevarech et Chayalei Tzva Hagana leYisrael Uyevarech et Chayalei Tzva Hagana leYisrael Uyevarech et Chayalei Tzva Hagana leYisrael העומדים על משמר ארצנו והרי אלוהינו מהלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ביבשה אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם ויעטרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון, ויקוים בהם הכתוב כי
Thank you very much for being with us today. Have a wonderful week. Please drop me that email when I mentioned as far as what your preferences are for Thursday night, given that it'll be the debate at the same time. And really, thanks so much for being here. Janet, your hand is up. What's up? Okay. Thanks very much for being here. Bye-bye.